So the thing for me is that even though it's a debate, it would be nice to see what we can agree on. Thank you. I have 21 questions, which means I have about 20 seconds of questions. Is the coordinated class the same as the middle class? No. The middle class is an obfuscatory, I could spend 20 minutes on that, term that is, in the United States, everybody thinks they're in the middle class. People who earn in the lowest, you know, in the bottom 10% think they're in the middle class. It's to make people think better about themselves. Make people think that they're not at the bottom. The coordinator class is the people who have a relative monopoly on empowering work situations, on skills and knowledge and so on, and who use that to get much higher income, much more status, much more power. How can you possibly propose a whole economy now, today? Isn't that anti-democratic? No, I think it's very democratic. I'm not imposing a whole economic prescription. I'm proposing an economic model. If we're going to have a democratic discussion of vision, we have to discuss vision. And we can't discuss it unless people propose it, and then discuss it, and then evaluate it. If I wrote it up in obscure language that you could only understand if you went, you know, to school for 18 years and then studied in the library and then had some kind of a lobotomy in order to understand the language, that would be undemocratic. But if I make it clear and then there's discussion of it and it's refined, that's democratic. Is there anything positive we can learn from Lenin? Of course there is. We can also learn positive things from Christ, but I'm not a Christian. We can also learn positive things from Chomsky, but I'm not a Chomskyan. Yeah, there are positive things to learn from Lenin. Marxism isn't economistic. There doesn't seem to be a question. Somebody said, but isn't it relations of production that are focus of class, not property? Yes, I think it should be. I think for many people it isn't, but I think it should be. The minute we say that, I think we see the three-class division. The minute we act on that it's relations to the relations of production, that it's social relations that impact people, then I think we see the three-class perspective. If we say it's property relations, we see only the two-class perspective. So I agree with the person that said we should look at relations, not just property. Because they are centralized, we must be too. I don't follow that. I don't understand that. Because they have tanks, jet planes, bombers, we must be too. We lose. We can't win that battle. I don't think we can win the battle of centralization either. I don't think that's even a close match. I think that what we have to do is instead find structures which are our long suit, and which that might not be, which are our strength, and which lead to what we want. If a Leninist comes up to me and says, I believe we have to do democratic centralism, I believe we have to have a high degree of centralization, I believe we have to do this, that, and the other thing, as dreaded necessities, right? Because of the power of the state, I don't feel any antagonism, right? I think that's a perfectly reasonable stance. I just disagree with it because I don't think they're necessities. I think there are alternatives that are better, and they're not dreaded. The alternatives, that is, they're less likely to lead to bad results. How do we win? There's a small one. Well, look, how has anybody won before? We create workers and consumers councils. We create women's movements. We create movements around various fronts. We have a revolutionary bloc that combines that movement not in a coalition, but in a combination that's bigger than the sum of all its parts. We struggle for reforms in a non-reformist way. We struggle for reforms in a way that builds consciousness and leaves our movements more powerful to demand still more. Eventually, we win. We seem to mean the same thing by winning. We take power. We are in a position to determine the destiny of society. Workers and consumers are, through their institutional vehicles, in position to determine economic outcomes. I can't do much more than that unless we spend too long on it. What do I believe in? Santa Claus. I don't know what to say. I mean, I believe in a different perspective. I believe in a perspective that emphasizes a three-class view. I believe in a perspective that emphasizes the importance of four spheres of social life, not just the economy. I believe in a perspective that emphasizes the critical linkage between the structures that we choose and the results that we get. Everybody here would agree, I think, that if I stood up here and said, we should have inside of our movement Jim Crow racism, you know, racism like they had in the South in the 1950s, I would be a lunatic. You'd laugh me off the stage or throw me off the stage. If I stood up in here and said we should have in our movement sexist structures and divisions of labor, same thing. You'd think I was a lunatic and you'd laugh or throw me off the stage. Same thing in the United States. Although 30 years ago, you could essentially say that and get away with it. Now, so a struggle took place. It is the case that our organizations and our institutions, look at your publishing houses, your left publishing houses in England, your left think tanks in England, your left progressive institutions in England, and see if they have a different structure than the BBC in terms of remuneration and in terms of power inside the institution and a division of labor inside the institution. Look and see. I think we think that it's okay to have inside of our left, because we don't address it enough, essentially a replication of corporate divisions of labor. I think that's a mistake. I think that makes our movements uncongenial to working people in the same way that having Jim Crow racism would make them uncongenial to people who suffer racism and sexism uncongenial to that. I didn't say these orientations don't say anything about sexism. I said, I mean, it's a hard point. I said that the conceptual framework tends to be such that under pressure, we, Marxist-Leninists, will tend to view issues of gender, issues of race, and issues of power insofar as they impact class issues. I don't even think that's, I mean, I think that's an understandable way to look at the world if you think that class struggle is the predominant defining thing which then changes the world. But I don't view it like that. I view all four of these realms as defining, and the categories of people that emerge from all four of those realms as critical, and the struggles as critical and interactive. So it's a difference. I believe, there's a lot of talk about Russia, which I'm trying to avoid. I believe the workers did have control, just so we know where we're at, did have control in Russia for a while. Well, basically had control in Russia for a while, and it was taken away. But I don't think it was Stalin that took it away. Right? I think it was the Bolshevik Party that took it away. So that's a significant difference that we have. Even if it wasn't true, I'd feel the same way that I do about Leninism, because I feel it about Leninism, about the ideas, not about distant history. Is the only issue about the coordinator quest which way it leans? No! The whole point is there aren't two ways. There are three ways. The whole point is that it isn't leaning from capitalism or socialism. It's the possibility of capitalism, coordinatorism, and whatever we want to call this. If you want to call it socialism, fine. Except that everything that's been called socialism so far is really coordinatorism. So there's three ways. Why did Lenin argue all power to the Soviets? Because that was the way to win. But that doesn't mean he wanted it to stay there. How do you prevent the coordinator class from rising to dominance? Well, the first thing you have to do is feel that it's an issue. The second thing you have to do, it seems to me, is you have to ask, well, how do you prevent capitalists from rising to dominance? You eliminate the source of the existence of capitalists. You get rid of private ownership of the means of production. How do you deal with coordinators? You have to eliminate the source of their power, of their advantage. And the source of that is a particular division of labor. A division of labor which separates off 20% from 80%. Right? And so you have to, and the thing I propose for doing that is balance job complexes in a vision, in an institution. Well, we can also do it in our institutions. We could all, I mean, Verso could have balanced job complexes. It doesn't. Right? Other publishing houses, other movement institutions could do that. Our organizations could do it. We could espouse it. We could say we're for it. So working people know that we're for that, and we're not for a new society in which their worst nightmare, doctors and lawyers, are the bosses. Right? That's for the people. There was another question: how come our movements are so middle class? Well, if we change that to how come our movements are to a considerable extent coordinated, and quite so in the United States, maybe the reason is because working people, and I'll speak for the United States, can sense, can feel the class biases of our movements. Our movements in the United States have an internal culture that's classist. Right? They tend to admire and like things that are coordinator class.